You're listening to the Immortal Icons of Dance podcast. I'm your host, Lauryn Johnson. Today we'll be learning about and honoring the late, great tap icon, Dr. Harold Stumpy Cromer. Though he was most known as a member of the two-man comedy team Stump and Stumpy, Cromer's career spanned over 70 years with work in vaudeville, film, television, and theater. A self-taught triple threat, Cromer was an encyclopedia of songs, dance, and often performed routines at the drop of a dime from any show that came up in conversation. Throughout his life, Harold Cromer was a teacher and mentor to many. A lifelong New Yorker, Cromer was born in Hell's Kitchen. He and his twin sister, Hattie, were the middle of 9 children. Harold began his entertainment career singing and dancing on street corners in roller skates. He used the sound of wheels against the pavement to create the clickety-clack of tap dance. He danced to help his family during the days of the Great Depression, sometimes earning a bag of groceries at local competitions. He began performing at the Kit Kat Club in Harlem while still in high school, and he appeared in the movie Swing in 1938. You can see a clip of him dancing in this movie by heading to the YouTube playlist associated with this episode in the show notes. In the mid-1930s, while tap dancing on the streets, a Broadway producer approached Cromer and asked, "Do you speak French?" He responded in French, saying, "Yes, sir, and you?" And he was hired on the spot to perform on Broadway alongside Ethel Merman and Bert Lahr in Do Barry Was a Lady. Cromer continued on tour in this hit musical as the only colored performer in the cast. Cromer performed on the vaudeville stage originally as the understudy for many of the great dance and comedy duos, including Buck and Bubbles, Moke and Poke, and Chuck and Chuckles. He knew all the routines and could jump into any character as needed. In 1948, Cromer joined James "Stump" Cross in the duo Stump and Stumpy. Together, Stump and Stumpy became favorites of the dance and comedy duos. Stump and Stumpy inspired a generation of young comedians, including Jerry Lewis, who has publicly cited their influence. Cromer performed as MC for the early rock and roll show called Biggest Show of Stars, featuring some of music's greats: Paul Anka, Buddy Holly and the Crickets, Laverne Baker, Fats Domino, Chubby Checker, Aretha Franklin, Bobby Darin, Marvin Gaye, among others. In 1978, Cromer made his way back to Broadway and joined the American Dance Machine as a guest soloist. He performed a routine of tap dance and vaudeville history. American Dance Machine toured the United States, Japan, and Europe, and even performed for President Jimmy Carter. In 2008, Bloomfield College awarded Harold Cromer with an honorary doctorate in performing arts. This was just one of the many awards he received. Cromer traveled widely as a master teacher and choreographer, known especially for his work, Opus 1. Cromer taught this work at tap conventions, festivals, and workshops throughout the world. Cromer described Opus 1 as more than a dance, but a way of life. Opus 1 continues to be taught, danced, and lived. Cromer performed for more than 8 decades throughout the United States, Europe, Japan, and China, bringing joy and a knowledge of history to every person he met, whether on street or on the stage. Our guest today is Shelby Kaufman. She worked closely with Dr. Harold Cromer throughout her career. Shelby is a New York-based dance teacher, choreographer, and performer. She has taught at Broadway Dance Center, Perry Dance Capizio Center, and the American Tap Dance Foundation. She's currently on faculty at Steps on Broadway. Shelby travels the world teaching workshops, conventions, and tap festivals, and she also teaches on her YouTube channel, where she has posted over 100 taptorial videos. If you want to brush up on your shuffles, you can find her YouTube channel in the show notes of the episode. In addition to teaching, Shelby has danced in Brenda Buffalino's New American Tap Dance Orchestra and is currently a long-running member of Jermaine Salzberg's Les Femmes. She has also founded and runs 2 dance companies of her own, Mazel Toes, comprised of professional Jewish hoofers in New York, and Great Lakes Youth Dance Ensemble, based in Michigan. Off-Broadway, Shelby assisted Gail Pennington Crutchfield on the choreography of Freckleface the Musical, and was the associate choreographer on Peter Pantomime and Peter Rabbit the Musical. Shelby has also made television appearances, tap dancing on both Sesame Street and The Steve Harvey Show, and she appears in the feature film A Bread Factory Part 2. Shelby and I met through TikTok, actually. I had posted a piece of an audition that was asking for some tap footage. I posted it to TikTok and asked TikTok World for some critiques and suggestions. Everyone in the comments tagged Shelby and suggested that we get in touch. We did, and she gave me some advice, and we quickly discovered that we were both from Michigan and had worked with some of the same choreographers. She was going to be in Michigan teaching at the Motor City Tap Festival in a couple of months, so I went and I took her class there to meet her in person. Today, I sit down with her to talk about the legacy of Dr. Harold Cromer. The source information for these bios is available in the show notes of this episode. All right, today we've got Shelby Kaufman here to talk with us about Dr. Harold Stumpy Cromer. All right, so the first thing I want to know is, so I believe that you met Dr. Cromer in around 2007, is that correct?
In May, yeah.
Okay, so were you familiar with his work at all before you met him?
So I say I met him in May, but I'm lying a little bit because we were at a tap jam once at Colby Narita's. She had these like small tap jams, and I was there, and he came up and like did a number kind of, and by do a number, I mean he, talked a little bit about his life, tapped a little bit, but I was just like, wow, who is this crazy guy, and I didn't know a thing about him before that, but he did do a little number, and that was my first introduction to him, though we didn't meet, like the two of us together until May 2007. So all I had known about him before we met was what I learned about him telling his own story for a couple minutes within a little improv stage moment that he had at this little tiny tap jam.
So what sparked your interest in learning more about his story or working with him?
Well, when I met him, actually, it was at a Tradition and Tap was the name of the workshop, and it was the Tradition and Tap honoring him. So he was the honoree of that weekend convention that I happened to attend, and it also happened to be the first Tradition and Tap convention that I ever did attend. And so he was sitting with Sarah Reich, who's one of his other assistants, who's another really close friend of his, and she and he were whispering to each other about me, and I could feel them pointing at me, and we were just warming up, so we weren't doing anything interesting. And afterwards he grabbed me and he pulled me over and he said, what's your name? And I said, my name is Shelby. He goes, no, your last name. And I said, Kaufman. And he goes, that makes sense. I'm like, what? Who is this crazy guy? And he goes, well, my dear girl, Kaufman means salesman in German, and you know how to sell tap dance. And that's the first thing he ever said to me. And, at first it was just, like any other of our elders as tap dancers, just intrigue as to, the more people I get to meet, the more networking I can do, the better. And I really wasn't a part of the tap world until then, because I went to University of Michigan. I wasn't really on the tap scene at all until my 20s, which was, for a tap dancer, a little bit late. And so for me, it was this entire world I knew nothing about. I learned how to tap dance. I didn't learn really much about tap dance. And so it wasn't just him at that time. It was my intrigue in every person that was in this community, whether just slightly older than me, my age, the greats. I mean, I knew almost nothing about anyone. So anyone that would even give me some time to talk to them, I was thrilled. And, it just started that way. And then we just became best friends, and it took off from there. But my intrigue in him was just, he was the honoree at a tap festival, and I wanted to learn everything I could about the tap world in New York as a new New York resident. And it was complete fate that my first convention I ever went to in New York was honoring him.
What was his demeanor like when you first met him? Was he approachable, friendly, intimidating?
Definitely not intimidating. He was always friendly and always kind of nutty. If I were to quote him, I would say he was nuttier than a fruitcake. He used to call people that all the time. But he had a really funny way of talking, and he was shorter than me. I'm 5'1.5", and he was shorter than me.
Wow.
So he wasn't intimidating in terms of stature either. But he talked like this, and he was kind of a crazy guy. There was just something funny about him, because as much as there's three of us that were like best friends with him, that we call our mentor, that were his three assistants. Me, Sarah Reich, as I mentioned, and Hillary Marie Michael. Well, Hillary Marie. She doesn't go by Michael. But me, Sarah Reich, and Hillary Marie were his 3 assistants. And the 3 of us literally felt like he was our best friend. And he was, but when he passed away, it was so amazing because it wasn't just us that were like pouring our heart, it wasn't just us that were pouring our hearts out on the internet. It was like every person in the entire TAP community had changed their own profile picture to a picture of them with Harold and had all these things to say, to the point where it was kind of amazing that he made everyone in this entire community feel like they were close to him, like they meant something to him. And it was also because they did. He was so thrilled to become this sort of grandfather figure, this mentor of the TAP community in his later years. And he loved that everyone knew who he was and wanted to hear his stories. And he did make every person feel close to him, and he felt close to them. It's just they didn't have the relationship we had, but to me, he was like another member of my family. He was like a grandparent to me. I was just as close to him as my grandparents, and I love my grandparents. And, so it was just interesting that he was able to form such a close connection with so many people of so many different races, ethnicities, genders, age groups. And that sort of tells you about him. He was so approachable, so warm, so friendly, so crazy that everyone just enjoyed him, and that we didn't feel that age difference with him at all. Ever.
Yeah. So how did you really begin working with him? Were you taking class from him initially? What was that transition like?
So the first time I met him, which was a TAP workshop, I was at one of the classes, or one class each day or something was his work. But then the rest of that workshop was just taking other people's classes. But we started to get close and talk to each other, and I think we just kind of realized we had sort of a bond, a connection, and we would, hang out with all the tap dancers at these like dinners after a festival or something, and we started to get to know each other. And I know he really saw something in me, which I was excited about. And one day he just said, "Hey, I got to teach this little class at such and such a place. I don't even remember where." And he's like, "Do you want to come be my assistant?" And I said, "Yeah, that sounds great." And so I just went with him. And it's funny because only one other person came to take the class, which was a male tap dancer. People just didn't know about it. And so it was me. It was a great opportunity for me to watch him sort of mess around in a chair and tap his feet, for me to, and him to say, "Okay, do that." And then me to see if I could kind of translate what he wanted into a standing tap dancer without like a whole class watching me. So it was a great first assisting him moment where there was really no pressure at all. And we ended up making like this pas de deux with lifts and turns. And the tap dancer is now still a close friend of mine that came to that class. And that's when I first assisted him. But then, of course, when he's teaching at festivals all around the country, the world, I started assisting him more and more alongside Sarah or Hillary or both. At DC Tap Festival, at Motor City Tap Festival, and sometimes like at the Motor City Tap Fest, Sarah and I would just switch off teaching steps of his material, which allowed people on the festival circuit to hear my voice as a teacher for the first time, which led to the Motor City Tap Fest. This is going to be my 11th year on faculty, but my first year on faculty was assisting Harold, and then I don't count that as my first year, but then the following year is when I got to be on faculty for the first time because of him. So a lot of what I've gotten really was because people knew that his opinion mattered to them and that he believed in me.
Right.
And that was amazing. So, I got to teach his famous pieces of rep, in different states, I would stay in hotels with him. He was really a respectful guy, so there was never any like worry about stuff like that. And he, we just had the best time. We had a great time together, but we also loved teaching together and working together, and it just took on a life of its own. And here I am 10 years after his passing, still teaching his rep. We just performed in his honor 3 days ago at Tap City for the 10-year anniversary of his passing.
Yep, I saw
so
that.
So it's still going. We're still working to carry on his legacy even today.
Yeah, I love that. What are some Stumpy isms? What are things that he would say in class?
Should I keep it PG?
Okay, yes.
Okay. And I asked that for good reason, and everyone who knows him knows why. Okay. Well, like I said, he says funny stuff like nuttier than a fruitcake. That was like a Stumpyism, but by the way, his Stumpyisms are more personal than in-class things that he would do. But something he did to everyone he loved is whenever he would say goodbye, he would say, "I love you, gotcha," every single time. So I have 3 voicemails of his that all end that way that are still on my phone. And his great-granddaughter, who was close to us, got gotcha tattooed on her arm. Like, that was definitely an ism of his.
Yeah.
But, he was an old guy, and he had a funny, dirty sense of humor. So some of his isms are not for daytime. But trying to think of some other funny things that he would say that were, like, for the masses.
Right.
Well, he had something called, that we joked to call thinking fingers. So anytime he would say something, he would go, I'll have a hot tea with lemon. Like he thought with his fingers like this. And sometimes if he was thinking slowly, his fingers would move slowly. And then when he was like, that meant he was like thinking about something.
Right,
He just said funny things. And, some of them are really personal. Like, I just thought it was funny that he couldn't come up with the name for quesadilla, but he always wanted to order them. So he'd be like, the peccadillo, the paper. And I'm like, quesadilla? Yeah, quesadilla. By the way, I can't talk as him without giving you his voice. It feels wrong. Yeah, you got to like do the Harold voice to do it right. Yeah.
I saw in an interview where you said that you agree with his philosophy that tap should be a form of entertainment rather than just tricks. Could you elaborate some more on that?
Well, he was interesting, actually. Something he got actually mad when people called him a tap dancer. Because he felt that was too narrow to explain who he was and what he did. He would say, I'm an entertainer of life. That is like a quote. That's a quote. I'm an entertainer of life. Like he would say that all the time. And by the way, look him up. Don't you realize I am good at this impersonation. But so he even took offense if you called him a tap dancer because he really felt that you needed to be acting, singing, writing, producing, like he beyond triple threat. He wanted to be a triple threat, but then be able to do everything else in this industry, and he wanted to be a well-rounded dancer, and he all the girls and all the people that he used in his work, he felt encompassed that they were dancers trained in other styles. And he used to make me sing on stage, which I don't consider myself a singer, and I still had to do like full singing duets where he would make me be like Ethel Merman because she was his friend. They did their first Broadway show together. Dewberry Was a Lady in 1938. And Ethel Merman was his oldest daughter's godmother. And so, he loved to do some of that stuff that he remembers from then. And he would make me play the Merman character. And I'm like, I'm not a singer. And he's like, yeah, you are. Stop it. He would make me go on stage and sing with him.
Wow.
But so not even just is it more than tricks. It's more than tap. It's more than being a triple threat. It's about really encompassing every facet of the entertainment industry and being proficient in all of those things so that you entertain people who don't care about tap at all. And that's the goal, really, is to entertain everyone, whether they themselves have ever put on a pair of tap shoes.
Yeah. All right, so you started to talk about his time in the Broadway show. Did he ever tell you stories about his time on Broadway?
He was the best and craziest storyteller that ever existed. And the reason is, and maybe I'm doing this because I'm channeling him a little bit, but someone would ask him a question, and then he would tell a story that had literally nothing to do with what they asked, but it was such an interesting story, and it went on for like 25 minutes, and then he'd be like, so what were we talking about? And he would never answer the question, and then I would just chime in and be like, yes. Like, the answer to his question was yes. Yeah, but his stories were insane. And so one thing he loved to do, because like I said, Ethel Merman was in that show with him. Another person that was in that show with him was Bert Law, I don't even know how to say his name right, but the Cowardly Lion from The Wizard of Oz, the movie. And so he loved that they had a friendship, so he would do his Cowardly Lion all the time, like put you behind, he would do his little like put him up thing. That was like a thing he loved to do all the time. And his stories were beyond Broadway, because really what his stories are about is being a black man in New York City for the better part of a century.
Yeah.
Literally, being a tap dancer almost for the entirety of tap dance's existence, in the center of it as a black man. And so what I learned from him went so far beyond stories about Broadway. It was stories about his tours. And, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Green Book. It won Best Picture a few years ago, but I went to see that movie by myself, and I cried the entire movie because even though this person was a pianist, like a concert pianist, and Harold was a tap dancer, I predicted in my own mind every single thing that was about to happen in that movie because my own best friend told me firsthand stories of those things happening to him in that time frame when he was on tour in the South, when he was on tour in Vegas. I mean, the idea that that they weren't allowed to be in the dressing rooms of a show that they were the headliners of, and instead they were put in a janitor's closet. Like, that's a true story of Harold's. And then after his passing, I saw basically that story told in front of me on a big screen. And I was just like, not only is this accurate, but my own friend experienced it.
Right.
And I heard about it from his own mouth. So his stories were heartbreaking and exciting. And I mean, his stories should absolutely be made into films and musicals and I mean, all of the above. But it went so far beyond his experiences on Broadway. He was in 3 Broadway shows. One was Dewberry Was a Lady. One was Early to Bed in the early 40s. And then his third one was The American Dance Machine in the 1970s. And those were his Broadway shows that he was in. But one cool thing is, before he passed, he was the, like, it's hard to explain this, but he was the oldest... He was the person alive that had been on Broadway the longest.
Oh, wow.
Meaning, like, no one else that was still living had been on Broadway as early as 1938. So he, like, received some accolades about that he was, like, the only remaining human being on the planet that had been on Broadway starting such an early date.
Wow.
Yeah.
If you like the work that is being done here at Immortal Icons of Dance, there are many ways you can support. Most simply, you can follow us on Instagram at Immortal Icons of Dance. By following us on Instagram, you'll also get access to the photos that we post each week that correspond with the episode. You'll find photos of our guest in some of the productions that they talk about. It would also be great if you could rate the podcast on whatever platform you listen. 5 stars are always appreciated. If you prefer watching your podcasts rather than listening to them, you can find the video of each episode on our YouTube channel. Lastly, did you know we have merch? We love talking about Immortal Icons of Dance, but we really love wearing them. I think it's so special to walk into a dance rehearsal wearing one of your role models on your shirt. It just gives you an extra boost of inspiration. You can find the merch at shop.immortaliconsofdance.com. Could you tell us some more, not some more, we haven't touched on it yet, about his vaudeville days and where the nickname Stumpy comes from? Could you tell us some more, not some more, we haven't touched on it yet, about his vaudeville days and where the nickname Stumpy comes from?
So, you know, it's funny because I love him so much and I want to do him justice, but these are his stories that I could be butchering because he told, like I said, he told stories in such an animated way, and he told us, like, his other 2 girls, and I sometimes, like, compare stories, and we learn from each other missing pieces of, so I don't want to speak for him, but I can just tell you what I know.
Yeah, put it this way. What did you learn from his stories?
Okay, here's what I gathered, and it's funny because, like, some of his other girls or some of the other people will be like, oh yeah, I heard that, but I also heard this, you know. So here's what I find interesting. He learned to tap dance, having never set foot in a tap class. He learned by sneaking into vaudeville theaters and watching so that he could tap and roller skate on street corners to feed his family.
Oh, wow.
He was one of, okay, I can't remember if he was one of 11 or he had 11 siblings. So he was either one of 11 or one of 12.
I think it's one of 11 because I was reading yesterday that he had, I remember the number 10. So
Okay.
I think it was 10
so
siblings.
because the number 11 is the number, and I can't remember if that included him or didn't
Right,
include him,
yeah.
but he had a ton of siblings, and he was a twin also.
Oh.
And Hattie was his twin sister. And interestingly, when he passed away, he only had one sibling left, and it was the youngest. But he was not, he was in the middle, like toward the oldest. So I think a lot of it had to do with, you know, having to help feed the family. It really started why he started learning in the first place. And actually, I believe that to get Dewberry Was a Lady, somebody saw him on a street corner and grabbed him and said, can we get you to audition for this show? We think there's a part for you. But so that was sort of how he learned to tap, was literally on a street corner. I mean, literally sneaking into vaudeville so he could tap on street corners. And so even today, not today, because it's been 10 years, but I think he's with me every day.
Yeah.
But even 10 years ago when he was still alive teaching, if he couldn't look at me and be like, do a shuffle. Like, he didn't even know what a shuffle was because nothing had names because he was self-taught. So it was so interesting how good he was for having learned completely from watching. But that's kind of how it started, was in vaudeville theaters. And then he became known as Stumpy because he joined. He did not originate. He was the second person to become part of the vaudeville duo Stump and Stumpy. And James Cross was Stump. And I think Eddie Hartman was the first Stumpy, and then he took over and became Stumpy. And it was like a buddy duo, straight man, funny man kind of thing, kind of like what you would see from, the white performers of that time. And Harold, speaking of his stories, would say, the two of us would perform at the Catskills where Jerry Lewis was a busboy, and then we'd see our act on television done by white people. So, I mean, it was really, what I heard from him is gut-wrenching. But but the two of them toured all over as Stump and Stumpy, and, would sing and do a whole bit and tap, and he was the funny man to James Cross's straight man. And so he's the second Stumpy, but he still gets that, like, in quotes, tap middle name because he became known as Stumpy for that.
What is the highest compliment he ever paid you?
He was great about that, actually, meaning, like, he said nice things to me all the time, and I knew how, one of his granddaughters, when he passed away, said, he loved you so much, but she was like, but I think you knew that. And I said, I did, because he told me every day, And he would tell me, how strong of a choreographer he thought I was. And actually, I have a quote of his that I use on my bio sometimes. That was something like, she's a triple threat in the theater, but she's a thinker and she can write. And she's going to write a whole bunch of stuff that's going to merit as well as her dancing. It's like some quote that's almost those exact words. But, he really believed in my talent and believed in how multifaceted I was able to be, and that I was more than a tap dancer, which is what he always wanted to make sure everyone knew about him. And I know he saw that in me, and I was always appreciative. But I think, telling me how much he loved my choreography, because that was something, like, his opinion just meant a lot to me. So anytime he loved what I was doing, it was the highest form of compliment coming from him, But I also just knew that he loved me as a person, and I think that is maybe even a better compliment, that we became so close that we were like family. And he was, he was a tough cookie. I can't tell you that he was like an easy guy to, he would go crazy and, yell all the time, and he was totally nuts. But we had like a really funny relationship that people would like laugh, because like we would bicker like an old married couple. But I think he was really good at being so constant with his praise that it's hard to like pinpoint something. Yeah.
So you kind of touched on what my next question was going to be. Was the flip side of the highest compliment was there any friction ever? What was something that he challenged you on that maybe in the moment was sort of, a rough patch to go through, and then you come out on the other side going, oh, I really learned a lot from that moment? Or,
well, something I learned about him. So we've had like little fights, but there was one that he like never let go of, which was really, to me, to this moment, so crazy. And I can tell you what it was, and then you'll understand why I'm like, what did I do? But then I guess when I think about him, I get it, I guess. But we did this performance. So he and I co-directed and, choreographed. I mean, I choreographed it, but we together created this show where we had two waiters actually giving people drinks at a corporate event. And like, and then they did a whole bit, but people saw them as their waiter before they went up there. So it was even more of a surprise that they ended up doing an act. And then we turned that into a 3-person act that included me. It was Cartier Williams and Chris Broughton were the two tap dancers in this. And then I was the third one in the second time we did this show. And we were in our costumes, and, we were taking pictures together. The three of us, because we were in costume trying to take cute pictures. And Harold was so offended that we took pictures without him that he brought it up to me like 5 years later that he was so mad at me about it.
Oh
like,
my gosh.
He never let it go. He was so mad at me. And I was like, Harold, we're not doing this instead of taking pictures with you, but this guy's in his like early 90s. He's sitting down. We're running around, taking a couple photos, warming up. We're going to grab him and take pictures with him next, but we didn't even get a chance to do that before he was like so mad about it. And like, I'm telling you, like, even like from the grave 10 years later, he's still mad at me about this. And I literally was like, I don't know why you're mad. But I guess it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, which is that he was always felt like he was sort of edged out of things, and it really almost teaches me more about him.
Right.
That something so silly to me was such a big deal to him.
Right.
That he lived his entire life still sort of trying to get his name out there and still feeling like he was never treated with the respect he deserved in the industry, and that he was never given the money or the opportunities that he deserved. And I think a lot of that also goes back to race and how he felt he was sort of pushed aside here and there. And I just think that coming from that place, anytime you even feel for a moment like people are excluding you, could be such a trigger.
Yeah.
And I never really thought much about that till now, but I guess if I were understanding that moment or why that became such like a rift for the two of us, it must be that, even though to me it was so innocent that the three of us were in a show together, dressed in our costumes, and we took a photo together. And him watching that happen was like the biggest fight we've ever had. So I guess it's not really about coming out better on the other side. I guess for me, today, looking back, it's about understanding why that was a trigger for him.
Right.
And understanding more about what he must have gone through for that silly of a thing to be so upsetting to him.
Right. That's a very revealing moment
Right?
to be able to look back on.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How did he shape you as a teacher and as a leader? And then more specifically, when you're teaching, is there a correction, a phrase, something that you're like, it's coming out of my mouth, but this phrase is coming from Harold through me?
So, okay. Well, as a teacher, and like I said, Harold didn't know the names of steps. So whenever we assisted him, we were teaching the material. Like, it was what we were doing is teaching the material, and then when he had something to say or a story to tell, that's when class would stop and he would talk about that. And he also really was very big on people dancing full out even when they were learning something. So something he would yell at me about is if I was teaching a turn without the turn for people to get the footwork and then going to add in the turn, he would literally be like, it's a turn. I'm like, I know, can they? No! Like, so he would expect everyone to learn how something was going to be done full out, like from the moment you started learning it, rather than like, because again, he was never taught. So I think he didn't have patience for people having to be taught anything. Right. Which is funny because I'm the opposite. Yeah. I teach so specifically. I give people counts. I'll scat. I will tell them the names of steps. I will even tell them what kind of notes they're playing. Like, I am such a teachy explainer, and I never thought about it, but maybe it is the juxtaposition of Harold not doing that. But in addition to that, we're getting like only a little racy right now. Okay. But when I quote Harold in class, it's because he used to yell at us on stage, more TNA. He would literally go, more TNA. And I mean, his point just is he liked women, he's from that time, to be very feminine on stage. And so he wanted more hip movement, more shoulder movement, more like, sticking your boobs out, sticking your butt out, like finding your hourglass shapes on stage. And so he would literally scream at us, more TNA on stage. And sometimes when I need more of that kind of flavor from a dance, I'll be like, to quote Harold Cromer, I need more TNA right now. Yeah. But that was like a funny ism of his that I was not saying earlier. But I mean, we gotta let the man be who he was a little bit in this podcast. Yeah. So.
I mean, that's what we're here to do. Yeah. Immortal Icons of Dance, keeping his memory, his teaching, and his phrases alive.
But, part of it was that he was an old guy who could get away with whatever he wanted to say. Part of it was the time frame he grew up in, and that he really just wanted women to dance feminine, and he hated it when we wore flats, so we would wear heels for his pieces. And it was just part of. And so, when you do a dance that's like a period piece, I get why he says that. Because I see it in my peers, in my friends, in my students, that what they really do need, as Harold said, is more TNA. Yeah. So that will live on through me.
That'll live on. What are some important lessons that you try to instill in the next generation that whether Harold taught it to you or whether you saw through his life and how your career has gone that you want to make sure that the next generation learns?
Well, I think he's right, and like we've talked about a little bit, that we need to create well-rounded dancers, not just people who have clean feet, because that's what's going to get you to work in this industry. I always tell people, and I have vocal nodules. I'm not a great singer, but I always tell people, like, if you want to eventually do this, you should be taking voice lessons now, and that's something that he would have loved for people to start doing earlier. You should be taking acting classes now, like, be as well-rounded as you can be. I think that's a philosophy he and I share. I think that I think I also learned a lot about the hardships people faced, certainly because of race and privilege, and I understand that concept as it's sort of become a more of a talking point in our society so much more heavily through my friendship with him than I would have had I not had all of those conversations, all of those times at the Westway Diner, at Theater Row Diner. Those were his spots that we would sit with him at a table and he would just tell us story after story after story. But I really do think that I have a different understanding from my friendship with him about what that really means, and making sure that, the next generation really is aware of that and cognizant of that, and making sure everyone has opportunities to dance no matter what. And in that way I definitely learned so much from him. And then just remembering that dance is about entertaining people, and that we should make people feel something no matter what we're doing on stage. It's not just about who's good at this, it's about who makes you feel something, who makes you want to watch them, who is a teacher who also tells stories and brings joy. And I love telling Harold stories when I'm teaching Harold's work, because what we would do is teach and then we'd stop for story time, and I like to do that myself about him, for him, even when he's not there. So.
Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you want people to remember about Harold?
Well, I just think that there's a few things. First of all, I think that Harold's philosophy, one thing he used to say all the time, is that he was 47. He was like in his late 80s, early 90s, and he said, I'm 47. But he took it to this new level where literally every person in the world on his birthday would be like, happy 47. Like, he really, 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 it was more of a life philosophy than a fake age, and the idea of staying youthful and staying timeless, and the fact that he basically lost everyone. I mean, he lost children and grandchildren while he was still alive.
Wow.
He lost 2 wives. He lost all of his peers in this industry, and rather than moping and being sad, he befriended us and started this like legacy of mentorship and of friendship with like these like young people. And I think in a way we kept him alive, and we kept him enjoying his life, and we kept him having things to work for. And I think that goes so beyond dance, is like, what do you do when life is hard, and how do you move on? And he found this way to like have the most fun and the most joy with these like people that are so much younger than him, different race. It's like on the surface you'd think we'd have nothing in common, but he teaches us that age is just a number, race doesn't have to mean anything, and that like these relationships could be some of the strongest in our lives if we take that blessing that Harold gave us and remember, sometimes I'll say, that person's so much younger, I guess we can't be friends. And I'm like, wait a second. Harold and I were best friends when he was in his like 90s and I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
So I think that is like something I think people should know about him, is he found joy even in hardship, and he found reasons to keep going even when it seemed like there might not be. And I think we could all like really take a note from that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Are there any resources if someone's not familiar with Harold's work, if they haven't seen him dance? Is there any book, article, video, anything that's out there that you would suggest people go and watch or read?
Well, there's going to be more. I think there's a lot of projects in the works here and there. But at the moment, I mean, YouTube is such a amazing place. The thing that's sad is I have a YouTube channel and I've had it for 9 years, but Harold died 10 years ago. So I never got to like put him on my channel. It didn't exist yet. But there are still videos of he and I like singing together on stage, dancing together on stage. There's videos of him doing interviews. I mean, you can find a lot on YouTube if you Google him or YouTube him. Harold Cromer, make sure it's with a C. He used to say this, and I still don't exactly understand it. He used to say Cromer with a K and not with a C, especially when in Germany. That was like one of his little things he said, like on repeat. But his last name starts with a C. And if you look him up, I mean, there are some videos. Actually, there are some videos with me and him together where he's interviewed and I'm sitting next to him. There's something also to know is that he has a really famous piece of rep called Opus 1, which is what we just performed the other day in his honor. But it was done all over the world. If you look up Harold Cromer Opus 1, not only, you might not see him, but what you'll see is his legacy being performed all over the world, in Japan, in Australia. I mean, there's videos on of Opus on YouTube from all over the world, and that's something that you can really readily find is that piece of work of his. And then another really great thing that you can find on the internet is something called Dance, 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 which he was in a black and white film in the 30s when he was like a teenager. He looked so young. I mean, even when he was in his 80s, he looked like he was in his, like 90s, he looked like he was in his 70s. But he looks like he's like 13 in this thing, but I think he's really like 17 or 18. But it's a piece that he did as a kid that somehow got immortalized and was able to be transferred to YouTube. And so you can actually see him doing this solo as a kid called Dance, Dance, Dance. So if you look up Harold Cromer Dance, 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 you can find that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put the links to some of these videos in the episode notes. So if any of you would like to follow up and be able to see some of Harold's work, you can find it there. And Shelby, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Be sure to visit the show notes of this episode to find additional resources. Just look for the episode description, then click on it to reveal more information. There, you'll find links to performance videos of our Immortal Icon of the Week or our Guest of the Week. You'll also find additional interview videos and any books or documentaries that can elaborate on the topics we cover in the episode. The Immortal Icons of Dance podcast is written, produced, and edited by me, Lauryn Johnson. Our music is written by Shelby Rassler of Jenkins & Rassler.